Good morning, Laura El-Tantawy. Welcome on VH Berries.
Good morning, Victor. Thank you for having me.
When you had an amazing career, taken photos of home all over the planet Earth, on every continent, how do you decorate your own one?
Wow, that's a really interesting question. I think my home is decorated with little aspects of my travels from different countries. I've been told that my home is a little bit eccentric in terms of the kind of colors that it has. It's quite a vibrant home, lots of colors. Surprisingly, not so many things hanging on the wall. My walls are quite bare. But colors in terms of furniture, cushions and stuff like that, and little clues to where I've been, in the world.
And also in a poetic way with impressionist paintings and a completely blue background behind you.
Well, yes. So I have two homes. One is my home, my home of, I guess, identity and heritage, which is Egypt. And that's where I am right now. And that's where you see that vibrant wall behind me. I also have another home, which is in London. And, that's kind of my other home, my adult home, my home that I've kind of built myself. I chose all the furniture, all the walls and everything. So you get an aspect of me in both homes, but definitely in both places there's a lot of color and books as well.
I would really love to discuss about one of your works. So in 2015, you published your first book centered on the Egyptian revolution of 2011. And you say this very powerful sentence: there is 90 million people in my country. In their faces, I see my own.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, for me, the work I did in Egypt was, it was really about rediscovering myself and my identity, my Egyptianness, I guess. And, as someone that has spent most of my adult life away from Egypt, I still have a very strong connection to this land by way of heritage, by way of culture, by way of our very strong sense of history as Egyptians. We have this very strong seed of our ancestors, our strong civilization, the pharaohs, and it's something we pretty much talk about every day or see an aspect of on a daily basis. So for me, returning to Egypt after living far away for more than 10 years, I came back a different person. I came back with somebody with a sense of knowledge and liberal ideas that I developed in the West. And I came back to sort of my home, being back with my family and trying to rediscover myself and bring those two worlds together. So indeed, I mean, that sentence rings very true, back then, and it rings true now, almost 10 years after I wrote it, that, it's about, it was 90 million stories then. It's more than 100 million stories now because of the population. And mine is just one story of those and one voice trying to express, my relationship and my story in Egypt.
That's absolutely right. Right now, in 2021, there is no longer 90 million people in Egypt, but 100.4 million.
Yeah, you've done your research. So yes, we are definitely growing and growing very quickly. And I think even the 104 million is as accurate as you can get. But we're not very good about keeping statistics. And one of the reasons is because the population is just booming at a very fast rate. So yeah, it's a changed country even over those 10 years. Back in 2011, there was this big political movement. My generation of Egyptians, people, who were born in the 80s, 70s, that were kind of going out on the streets to reclaim our own country. And now 10 years on, it's interesting to see how that generation has kind of made amends with how the revolution has developed and what we're choosing to do with our lives right now, 10 years on, how that revolution has impacted us.
In this work, you have combined photos taken over a span of time from 2004 to 2014. Over these 9 years of continuous work, what did you learn from the essence of the Egyptian identity?
Yeah, this is a really difficult question for me because I think it's something I'm still learning about. And the reason it's also difficult is because for me, myself, I'm kind of a composite of two very different cultures. So for me, when I'm looking at Egypt, I'm looking at it not through sort of traditional Egyptian perspective, somebody that's been here, born, bred, hasn't left the country. I'm looking at it through the perspective of somebody that has this amalgamation of different perspectives. So I think my impression of the country that I'm in is that it's a country that has so much potential to achieve. And I see that the young generation, and like I said earlier, this generation that created the revolution and was impacted by it is really trying to push the boundaries for our own future. We have entrepreneurs, creators, inventors, artists, and people who are really trying to push the boundaries in order to kind of create a better life for ourselves and kind of change or re-navigate our path or the path that we've been on. I think it's a country that has a lot of potential, and it's really lies with that generation now to try to make amends. And there's so much to achieve and be done here.
This same year, in 2015, you have been rewarded for this work called In the Shadows of the Pyramid with a Deutsche Börse Photography Prize.
Yeah, it's to my own surprise, to be honest with you, because this work really resonated with people on multiple levels to a way that I never expected and could not have anticipated. I think the reasons for that is because Egypt is a country that people still really know more about it historically, about the pharaohs, the pyramids, these ancient monuments. And modern Egypt is not a country that people know so much about. I even noticed that with conversations I have with people, on my travels, it's mostly around the pharaohs. And when it comes to modern Egypt, people don't know very much. So I think when we had the revolution in 2011, it was really the first time that all of these issues were brought out in public and people started to understand what life in modern day Egypt was like and what people were fighting for. So I think the work resonated with people, and also resonated because there were so many foreign journalists and photographers that came to document the movement here in the same way they did in Tunisia and afterwards in Libya. And I think having an Egyptian voice tell the story and tell it the way that I did, by featuring my own family history and pictures from my own family album and juxtaposing that with what I was encountering on the streets was something that I think really touched people. And it's something, like I said, I couldn't have anticipated because I was always doing the work for myself first. And I don't mean that in an egotistical or selfish way. I just mean that I was creating the work to understand my own relationship with Egypt. And then when I put it out in the public realm is when I noticed that it was really resonating with people. And it's something I'm very proud of.
This is very fascinating, Laura, because you just mentioned the two words modern Egypt. So, because today, Egypt is known for their pyramid, for the tourism, but you also want people to be interested in their culture and their history.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, this past year with COVID, with 2020 and all of us being, in lockdown and hearing a lot about illness and death and all of us being really saturated with this negative news, I think that starting this new year and being, speaking to you now from Egypt, from this home that I'm rooted to, I really feel that I want to do positive stories that shine the light on good things that are happening in this country and that also show that there is potential. And I'm saying this also with January 25, 2021 weeks away. So that will basically mean we've been 10 years since the revolution. So 10 years since that book that you mentioned, In the Shadow of the Pyramids. And I'm personally in a moment of reflection now thinking, 10 years is a very long time. How did I change? How did the story change? How did those images change that I took in Tahrir Square? How do I look at them today? And how would people look at them today, 10 years on? And I think, there is a sense of a little bit of sadness, because I think the story of the revolution, the way that we had hoped it would develop as Egyptians, didn't really turn out that way. I think there's still a lot of things in Egypt that haven't changed and that need to be changed, essentially, for us to be democratic and free and feel like we have a sense of ownership and agency over our own country. But I think under the umbrella of the revolution, so many positive things have happened. It's really empowered people to take matters into their own hands. Because I think what happened with the revolution is that it gave us a sense of confidence that, our fate is not predetermined, but we actually have agency over our future. And I think that has really diffuse down to people. And I can see it now with young people in their 20s, creating all these movements, movements against sexual harassment. And Egypt was one of the biggest countries with the highest rate of sexual harassment. It was a big problem during the protests in Tahrir Square and other crowded areas. And people are now talking about it. They're making movements about it. They're empowered by it, and they're created by women as well. And I see movements by creatives, artists, people with really positive voice, people who do these amazing projects around recycling and saving the environment. So basically, it's a long answer, but I think for me, one of the things I've taken from last year is that I really want to kind of also shine a light on positive things that are happening. And with the revolution, the 10-year anniversary coming up, I want to see how that revolution has impacted people to change our destiny in different ways.
Laura El-Tantawy, you just mentioned this new generation that bring a new light, a brighter light. What work are you doing right now related to Egypt? Because you can be also part of this new generation.
Yeah, well, it's a good question. I am definitely part of that new generation. And I think my role within that is to use my voice as a photographer to shine a light on these things, and also to learn and educate myself about my country, because what happens when you live so far away, as I have. I've spent most of my adult life away from Egypt, but I still maintain a strong bond with this country, and I'm always coming back here. I have a home base here. My parents are here. My extended family is here. So I am Egyptian, but I'm also somebody that hasn't been saturated with Egyptianness. So I think I'm still learning, and there's so many stories that I want to do here. Some of them exploring our country historically, like our relationship with the River Nile, our future. Egypt is one of the countries that's really going to be impacted by global warming, and we're seeing those changes now, with changing seasons and weather patterns. And I've been doing an extended series over the last, nearly 10 years, called I'll Die For You, looking at farming and the relationship of farmers to the land. And that project started because of my own grandfather, who was a farmer in the Egyptian Nile Delta. So I've been photographing that. And the series I'm working on right now is looking at exactly what I described, this young Egyptian population in a post-revolution Egypt, and what are they doing that's been inspired by this revolution to change our destiny somehow, or how have they been impacted by it? So those are the two projects I'm working on. And actually, I've just released a second edition of my book, In the Shadow of the Pyramids, that's coming out on the 25th of January. So again, in a couple of weeks or a few weeks. And it's looking at the same set of images, but reframing the narrative. So looking at how those 10 years have poetically and metaphorically changed how I perceive the images, and how I would like readers to look at the narrative around the revolution using the same pictures, basically.
Exactly. So you mean that in 10 years, your point of view has of course changed. And I would really much like to retrace the journey of your life, and right from the start, I sense that you're very attached to the year 1980. You included it at the end of your username on Discord.
Yes, I have. I mean, it's partly easy. Like it's an easy thing to do, but I don't know. I have, as somebody that perceives the world from a visual point of view, I just find that the numbers look nice. So I find that it visually looks kind of, kind of nice. But of course, it's the year of my birth, so I'm kind of indebted to that year. It's when I came to this world, and it's something that's always in my memory, and I'm attached to it.
Yes, because you started and ended in the shadow of the pyramids by saying, "My name is Laura El-Tantawy, I am Egyptian." And if I were to continue the sentence, it would be something like, "I was born in Worcestershire, not far from Birmingham in the UK."
Yes, I certainly was. And I was born in a small village called Ronkswood. Some English people don't even know where that is. But somehow my Egyptian parents, whose English wasn't so good at the time, they managed to find and settle there for 5 years. And they kind of started their life there. And that's where I was born. So yeah, again, from the very beginning, I had a life that was in two places. So I think my destiny was always that I would be somebody that would have to negotiate that somehow. Of course, I didn't know how, but I happened across photography, and I absolutely fell in love with it because of its lyricism, because of its poetry, because of the emotion that a photograph carries, because of its storytelling power, the sense of history that's embedded in imagery. I love photography for all of these things, and I can only hope that the work I create reflects some of these virtues that I absolutely love about this medium.
This is a sense of duality, because not only you are portraying the truth, but you are also having characteristically painterly and really cool eyes on reality.
Yes, and my work wasn't always that way. I went on a journey, a photographic journey, in order to discover what my voice as a photographer was going to be, and how I was going to articulate my voice. Photography is a language, so I think it's about finding the best form of expression that you want to use to express that, to reach people. And I think for me, I went on a journey. I started out as a photojournalist working in newspapers, and my work was quite traditional. As a matter of fact, I was looking through some boxes with my mother the other day, and I found some of my earlier work. And I was like, wow, I've really come on a long journey. Those were my early images that I made as a newspaper photographer. And I was like, wow, my work has changed so much. And yeah, I've went on a journey, experimented with what the camera can do as a tool to portray what I'm seeing with my eyes. And, it took me more than 10 years to develop that language of, as you described, this impressionistic language. And for me, I took the images at that point early on. I wasn't really sure what I was doing, but I felt that there was something in the image that I created that I really fell in love with. It touched me, in some way. And I think it's important to protect that voice when you feel that you've expressed something and you look at it and you feel like it says something to you. I think it's important to acknowledge that and to understand why it touched you, but also to protect that and try to nurture that form of expression. So it took me a long time, and it took me a lot of time to make images with a sense of authority that way, and also to feel confident to present it to other people and feel like this is what I have to say and I want to say it that way. And, early on, not a lot of people were interested in that work. They said, yeah, there's something interesting, but we're not really sure that we want to publish it or buy it. So it took a lot of work to get here. And, I've worked other jobs alongside photography in order to nurture that impressionistic voice that you see in my images.
When you were discovered these early pictures, you were touched. Are you prone to nostalgia because there is no replay button as there is on this VH Berries episode?
No, absolutely. I am prone to nostalgia. I think it runs in my family. And I think, to be honest, I think it's a very Egyptian quality. We are very sentimental people. We are always looking back, by virtue of our history and our civilization. We are always looking back and comparing our modern self to our ancient self and thinking, what are we doing now as modern Egyptians that can even stand anything in comparison to our ancient ancestors? So, we're always looking back. We're always looking back in black and white at our films, at our music, how, people like Kulthum and Abdul Halim Hafiz were so much better than modern Egyptian singers. So as Egyptians, we do always look back. And I think in my family, we're a very sentimental family. We hold on to things, and it's a good quality to have, but sometimes it also holds you back. So I think with myself, I battle with that sometimes. It's an interesting quality in relation to photography, because photography, by its own virtue, it's grounded in history. So you kind of look back with images. It holds a moment still. So, that is one of the values of photography. But for me in my daily life, I'm trying to look forward every day more than look back as much as possible.
And this leads us to another point related to nostalgia, because we all have 24 hours per day. Our time is limited. So obviously, like all of us, you have to face choices. And what makes you choose, for example, to document farmers in India rather than other topics and locations?
I think it's just about a topic that I feel very strongly attached to. I haven't, if you actually look at my career, I've been taking pictures since 2002, and I haven't done so much work. If you look at my website, there's maybe about 5 big projects that I have on there. So I'm somebody that really finds something that speaks to me, and I try to hold on to it and express it for as long as I feel I should have, or until I feel this organic, natural sense of, okay, it's over. Now it's time to move on to something else. So, for all the issues I've taken on have some kind of connection to my personal history and my background. In the shadow of the pyramids, obviously we've spoken about it. It was about my own sense of feeling rooted or not rooted to Egypt and trying to navigate through that and understand my sense of Egyptianness. With I Lie For You, it started with my relationship with my grandfather. I never met him, but always heard about him through my father, that I personally resemble him so much. I kind of look like him. Some of my mannerisms are like him. And he died before I was born. So I was always very curious about this man that I'm being compared to that I never met. So it was kind of the thread that kind of introduced me to that project and made me feel really curious about farmers. And, it expanded the project, of course, to looking at the life of farmers in different countries and how they're being impacted by these drastic weather patterns, and how my own grandfather would have reacted to that had he been alive. And, I did a series called The Veil. I'm from a moderate Muslim family. Most of the women in my family cover their hair. They wear the hijab. So I was always very curious about perceptions around the hair cover living in the West, particularly after 9/11. It was very politicized, and it was always portrayed as something that was forced upon women to wear by the male in their life, whether it was the father, husband, or brother. And that was never my own experience with the veil. The women in my family are very strong role models for me. And so I wanted to explore the veil in a way that felt authentic to me, the way I grew up experiencing it through the women in my life. So all the stories I've done have some kind of relationship to me and my own history. And it's very difficult for me to take on projects that I don't feel that I understand or have some empathy towards. For me, the doorway into any project is a sense of understanding or a question of some sort, and also a sense of empathy. I have to feel empathy towards my subjects to begin to approach them photographically.
Sure. And Laura El-Tantawy, can you remind us who was your father?
So my father, his name is Muhammad Atif. He is a doctor. He's an anesthesiologist, but he is also a retired military general. So his whole life he worked as a military doctor. He was on the front lines of several wars that we had in the 50s and 60s. He was in Yemen, stationed in the military, Egyptian military. He was in Libya, stationed in the Egyptian military. And then he basically left the military in the 90s and he went to Saudi Arabia with my mother and myself. And he was working there as a doctor and he retired about 3 or 4 years ago. And now he's enjoying his retired life.
And I would also really much like to talk about the question concerning the setup because, for example, I found that the camera that you are using at the beginning of I Will Die For You to film Indian agricultural fields is rather simple. It looks like 19mm film.
Yeah, I think you're talking about my Mamiya RZ67, which is one of the sort of old school cameras. It's typically, it uses 5x7 manual film. So traditional film rolls. It was the first time that I ever used film was on that series when I went to India. In fact, it was a bit of a disaster because I'm about to tell you that I'm a bit chaotic sometimes when I work, but I arrived in India and I really wanted to shoot on film, but I didn't have a camera or film. But somehow, by way of magic, I thought it was going to happen. And it did. And I think it just shows that I believe in the universe and that the universe always comes through for me. So thank you, universe. But basically, I arrived and I was staying with a friend of mine who's a photographer. And he said, well, why don't you borrow my Mamiya? And I'll give you some film. You can buy it from me. And that's how that project started. And I'm, eternally indebted to him for allowing me that. So I photographed on that camera and I just kind of learned as I used it. It's a very different way of working, and you'll hear from any photographer who's used digital and manual or old school film cameras that it's again, talking about nostalgia, it's quite a nostalgic way to work, but it's also a much slower way to work. We now live in a world where we produce I don't know how many million images per second all over the world because of digital technologies. And what manual film allows you to do, or manual cameras, is you really appreciate every single image you take because you only have 36 or maybe 26 images per roll. So you really think before you click the shutter, and you become really, decision making is very strong. Whereas with digital cameras, you can shoot 100 frames easily in 15 minutes and you can delete what you don't need. So I think it's a very different way of working, and it really makes you appreciate photography. And also nurtures your relationship with the people you're photographing because it becomes more of a slower process. You're looking at them, you're observing them. But also working with such a big format camera as that, what I found is that people become very curious and they start to ask you questions about the camera and they're looking at it, and it kind of breaks the ice. So in a portrait situation, it's ideal in a way because it really breaks the ice between you and the person you're photographing. And you just start to tell them about the camera and you start to have a conversation, which is really good because portrait situations, for me personally, I always feel really, really nervous. I'm always nervous making any pictures, but portrait situations for me are when I'm most nervous. So having the camera kind of break the ice a little bit is always great.
By the way, Laura El-Tantawy, concerning the universe, in Cairo, where you are, there is not a lot of light pollutions, so you can see the stars and the universe by night.
Yes, you can. And I think it really depends on where you are. I think Cairo is actually a very polluted city. And I think during different times of the year, you can kind of see a little bit more of what's above us in the skies than other times. Outside Cairo is when you really get to appreciate the stars and you get to see them more. But Cairo is a very charming city. And I think it's a city that we always say never sleeps. Even during COVID and the times we're in, it's a city that is still very much alive. things are happening, gears are shifting, people are really working. It's a city where people really persevere and people work really, really hard in order to survive. And it's a very Egyptian quality. And I think I really respect that about my people. And I really respect that sense of survival, that they really struggle to survive, and they always do it with a smile. That's a very Egyptian quality.
Exactly, because, for example, concerning your work in India, you say that you are showing the relationship between man and land, but I believe that you are doing this everywhere you are working. For example, in Egypt, you are showing the relationship between the people and their land.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I never thought about it that way, but I think you're absolutely right on. I think for me, photography is a way to interact with people. It's a way to tell their stories, and it's a way for me to really tell stories about worlds that I'm not quite connected to by virtue of how I grew up or where I grew up and how I was educated and all that. I mean, Egypt is a very class-based society, and photography has allowed me to knock on doors, not literally speaking, but more poetically speaking, to knock on doors of people that I would have never otherwise met in my life, because, we can be quite a sheltered society. And I really appreciate that I've met people and I've expressed stories, even if those stories were never published, but at least I met people and had conversations that I learned a lot from. And I'm not, it's very difficult for me to take a picture of a landscape without people or a building without people. For me, photography is about life and showing life at its full spectrum of color. And for me, that has so much connected with people and the stories they have to tell.
And today you are representing all these people because you became a Canon ambassador in Europe.
Yes, indeed. So, that was one of the highlights for me of 2020. Again, 2020 was a really difficult year for everybody. We don't even need to talk about that anymore. But I have to say, for me, professionally speaking, it was such an incredible year because some of my projects got awarded some grants, so they will allow me to continue doing these works. So as somebody that works independently and really protects my sense of an independent identity as a photographer, it's been great. And of course, being a Canon ambassador has been incredible. It was such a beautiful surprise and a great opportunity, because basically what that means is that, my work, I've basically photographed with Canon cameras since the beginning of my career as a freelancer. So for the last 15 years or 18 years. So I've always held on to Canon cameras, but to basically represent now the brand for me is great. One, because it allows me to kind of showcase my images in a way that hopefully reaches an audience and speaks about the engineers and all the techs that develop the cameras and these tools that we use in the field that never get, you never see them, you never hear their stories. So I really hope that my images can be a way to shine a light on them. They're kind of like silent heroes in the background. But it's also a great opportunity for me to represent such a powerful brand, and a brand that I've worked with and one that I really believe in, that allows me to do the work that I do and that is constantly developing the technology and the tool in order for me to continue doing my work successfully.
So basically, Canon knocked on your doors by saying, "Good morning, we want you to represent photography from Africa in the UK."
Yeah, absolutely. And, again, when you work independently, as I do, it's really easy to feel very alone and to feel like, there's nobody to talk to, nobody, cares about what I'm doing, so it's very easy to doubt yourself. And it's something that I always have. I always doubt my work. I always have questions about what I'm doing. And you kind of have to self-motivate yourself all the time and just kind of pat yourself on the shoulder and say, it's okay. You just have to believe in yourself, and you trust a very small circle of friends and close people to share your work with that will be that network of support. So again, to have Canon come to me and say, we believe in what you're doing, we believe in your voice, and we'd love to have you representing what we do, is something that I feel incredibly proud of. And actually, I was very emotional when it happened. I still am a little bit, because it's a really big deal. It's a really big deal when you're doing work and you're not expecting anything, and then something really great happens. It's like this beautiful gift. And again, it's the universe. Thank you, universe. Yeah.
That's right. For example, on your website, laurael-tantawy.com, you are writing, I am proudly representing my own work.
Yes. I mean, photography is a very, very difficult profession to take on. I think it's like any creative profession, where, it's very, very difficult. So many people are doing it. It's very competitive. There isn't really so much money in it. It's really about passion and you having to believe in your sense in that passion and just kind of keep going and keep motivating yourself and keep finding ways to create and to stay positive and, just to hustle, really. So yeah, for me, I am proud of the journey I've taken on, and I have to remind myself of that every once in a while to kind of just reflect and think, I'm actually not doing so bad. I'm okay. But yeah, and it's also a profession where you hear no so many times. You can present your work for an award or to an editor, to a publication, and you're going to hear a lot of no's. So I think it makes you develop this idea of thicker skin, as we describe, to resist all of these no's and to kind of, emerge from it somehow okay emotionally, but also mentally in order to continue on. And I think any creative profession has that. It just comes with the territory. So I think part of it also is that we're a profession where, if you don't belong to an agency that represents your work, or there isn't an agency speaking on your behalf, then you have to do it by yourself. And that's very difficult to do, but it's something I'm proud that I'm doing. And I think because, again, of the nature of the profession, I always tell people that I talk to or students when I teach workshops that I really urge them to try to be their own agents. So basically try to represent your own work the best way possible and, speak for yourself and have agency and control over your work. And then if you do join an agency, it's just a bonus. And I think also the kind of agency structure that we have now in my profession, we have very few agencies representing, the kind of photography that I do, documentary photography. So again, it's very competitive. And once you are in this agency, I think it's important to realize the agency is not going to do everything for you. You also have to do a lot of work. So I think there's a lot of romanticism around, how you represent yourself as an artist. And, if you're with an agency, then suddenly it's like you're a star. But I think, again, it's a romanticized idea, and it's really important to take authority over your own work.
I enjoyed talking to you. Thank you, Laura.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me and for your wonderful questions.